Alrighty, I think we can go ahead and get started. Hi, my name's Maria Pretzelis. I am the co-chair of the Active DMPs interest group and the host for today's webinar, which is titled Integrating Research Data Management Services Using Machine-actionable DMPs. So before we get started with the presentation today, I've got a bit of information to share with you about RDA and a few general housekeeping information pieces as well. So the Research Data Alliance is a community of over 1,200 data experts from 148 countries who collaborate and build the social and technical bridges to enable open data sharing and the reuse of data. So members of the RDA come together through self-formed focused working groups, exploratory interest groups, and communities of practice groups to exchange knowledge and discoveries, to discuss barriers and potential solutions, and define policies and test standards. Many of the 88 active groups have produced outputs to enhance and facilitate global data sharing and reuse. So the RDA also has 30 national groups that support initiatives of the RDA members of those regions by providing a platform to interact on a global level. Those national groups may be individual countries or a group of countries. An example here is the region of the Americas that includes all the countries within North America and Latin America. There are also 5 contributing regions: Australia, Canada, the EU, France, and the United States. And they each provide the resources to support and sustain the RDA global operations. So the RDA US is one of those recognized regions with over 2,000 RDA members. In addition to providing resources to sustain the global operations, the RDA US also supports the RDA global community by hosting and coordinating community activities, including this webinar. Series focusing works from the working and interest group outputs. They have a podcast series featuring interviews and discussions with the working group co-chairs of newly endorsed RDA outputs. We're also hosting a series in Latin America as a way to introduce the RDA community there. So in addition to the 5 contributing regions, there are also 58 organizational members who also contribute resources to the RDA global operations, and 12 affiliate members that support RDA in a variety of ways. So today's webinar will be translated live from English into French and Spanish. So if you want to listen to a translation of the webinar, you can select the globe at the bottom of your Zoom control screen. We'll also be recording today in English, French, and Spanish, and we'll add a link to the recordings on the RDA website webinar page. So we've allocated time at the end of the webinar for questions. So please use the Q&A to ask questions. If there are more questions than we have time for, we'll transfer unanswered questions to a document and send those to all of you following the webinar. So today's webinar is presented by members of the RDA DMP Common Standards Working Group. The first presenter today is Tomáš Miska. He is a senior scientist at TU Venn and SBA Research, which is one of the top universities in Vienna, Austria. The second presenter today is Eli Papadoulou, who is a digital librarian and junior researcher in the Information Management Systems Institute at Athena Research Center and Open Air in Greece. The third presenter will be me, Maria Pretzelis. I am the product manager in the UC3 Curation Center at the California Digital Library in the United States. And the final presenter will be Marek Shinikek. Sorry, I messed up your name, I tried. He's a junior researcher and developer in the Department of Software Engineering at the Faculty of Information Technology in the Czech Republic. So I'm now going to turn it over to Tomáš for the first presentation.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today with you. And I want to start my presentation. I'm the chair of the DMP Common Standards Working Group. And today my plan is to quickly tell you about the motivation, why we actually worked on the recommendation, what the group did, what the machine actionable DMPs actually are. I will show you some examples of how we can use them also to integrate the RDM services. And last but not least, I will provide further reading resources where you can get more information on what the group did and how to use the standard. So to begin with, here in the slide, you can see examples of DMP templates or actually DMP guidelines from funders in Europe and also in the US. And when we met in 2019, when the group started, we realized that there is a lot of things being asked, and it is actually not really clear who needs all this information and why this is all asked. And we also understood that a lot of is expected from the researchers, and the topics that are covered by data management plans are so diverse because they include things like licensing, storage options, backups, file formats. It cannot be answered by one person. And for this reason, we started to make a survey and talk to different stakeholders involved in research data management to identify their needs and to find out what really would make DMP a useful thing for researchers, but also for others. What are the information that these different stakeholders can provide? And what are the information that actually they can reuse? And we understood that if we create a common way to represent this information, then actually we can have machines that can act on behalf of the stakeholders, and thus we can automate a lot of the RDM tasks. And some of you might have seen this picture already before, but I will explain it to the newcomers. So you can see in the slide that we have a typical workflow for writing a DMP. So we have a researcher who starts a DMP, and first the researcher has to specify some kind of information on the type and size of data. So let's say the researcher tells us that she is going to work with 3 gigabytes of CSV files. And then the researcher has to say how much it will cost to keep this data on the specific infrastructure, on specific servers, has to actually request this infrastructure, decide on the license to use, and then at the end, when this all information is added to a DMP, the DMP can be reviewed and submitted to the funder. And at all these stages, we can support the researcher by including the other stakeholders at the right moment. So for example, information about the costs and also booking of the storage could come from the infrastructure operator. Information about the license can be provided by the research support or data stewards. Many researchers don't really think about the license, and they will just use the license that is recommended to them, and only in special cases they will actually know what they want to do, and they will know why they are special and why they want a different one. So why not to automate these steps and simply put some systems that can suggest best solution depending on what was the initial input from the researcher. So in this case, the information that the researcher has 3 gigabytes of CSV files. So since we are not able to focus on all these problems, the working group started to work on a common way to model the information in data management plans. And we produced a recommendation, which you can see in the slide. This is a 2-pager document which outlines the key components that we believe is a minimum common set of information that can be exchanged between different services. And there is also an extensive documentation on GitHub. And in the next 3 slides, I'm going to show you excerpts from this documentation, and we'll try to show you how to read the documentation, how to interpret it. So here you can see a set of properties like contact, contributor, cost, created data set. They are in the first column. Each of the properties has a description and information whether it's obligatory or not. If the cardinality is 1, you must provide this information. If it's 0 or n or 1 or n, it means it's optional. And this is a common set of information, and it's not a questionnaire. So we didn't come up with yet another template different to NSF or Science Europe or Horizon or NIH. So we're not going to ask questions differently. We are focusing on actually how to model the information in such a way that machines can also understand it, and in such a way that the information can be rendered to people. Most of these fields are optional, and this is because specific constraints can be set by funders, or they depend basically on the context in which the DMP is used. So if, for example, you want to have a DMP for a project because a DMP must always be connected to a project, this can be modified to say the cardinality is 1 instead of 0. And a specific example here of machine actionability is here. You can see that we use present identifiers and controlled vocabularies. And in this example, you can see that Moritz Staudinger will be a data manager, and Moritz is identified by its ORCID ID, and this identifier is provided. And there is also an email address of Moritz. In traditional DMPs, this would be very vague because people would write usually a sentence saying, Moritz will be our data manager, and you will not know which Moritz and how to contact him, and this information will be missing. And it also will be hard for machines to actually interpret this information. We can also model more advanced use cases. So here, without going into the details, it's a description of a data set that is described by a DMP. There is a human readable description, like a title and what this data set is about. But there are also some specific information, like what is the format, size, and the location of the data set. We can see here that it's kept on Zenodo. It also specifies what is the license and that there is an embargo period on the data set. So again, very specific terms using URLs, using PIDs, and referring to specific systems. So in general, this can be summarized that the role of machine-actionable DMPs is to be the glue between the systems to automate getting information in and out of the system. So DMP has a central role, and we can, for example, get information from repositories on the data sets that are being reused or published. We can also get information about the repositories listed in registries. We can also get some information exchange between the funders. That's the goal of the common of the recommendation created by RDA. To give you a more specific example, I have one from Austria, from Vienna, where I also work. And last month, we have released a tool called DAMAP, and we are using it at our university, at the Technical University in Vienna. And this tool creates two outputs: standard DMPs, which are a PDF document, and also maDMPs. But during the creation of the DMP, we are using a lot of information from existing systems. For example, we connect to the knowledge graph provided by OpenAir to import information on data sets that researchers are reusing. We also import information from our research information systems on the projects and all the administrative information about our researchers. And we also have a custom list of services that our university provides. And then researchers who are writing a DMP can choose from a list of storage options. So for example, our own cloud or our own repository, and then specific details on these services like backup frequency or who is responsible for maintaining them is added automatically to a DMP without even a researcher noticing it. And what we want to have also till the end of the year is the integration with our data repository, so that people who upload data into a repository can click one button and automatically adds information on a data set to the DMP. Something that is more aspirational and something more about the future is, can we get funder integration, and can we also use maDMPs for automated assessment and feedback to the researchers and to the reviewers. So for example, can we calculate the fairness score of what the researcher did, or can we assess how feasible is what is described in a DMP? But this is only one of the directions where we can actually go from now on. If you're interested in other adoptions, here is a list of logos. So basically most of the DMP tool owners are implementing the recommendation of RDA. There are also some private companies and research centers around the world. If you want to get more details on the specific adoptions, you can read one of the papers created by the members of this working group. It's published in the Data Science Journal, and you can basically read the full story of developing the recommendations of a recommendation, what we did, how we did it, and what is the result. There is also a very interesting paper about the key elements of the whole ecosystem that we need to make DMPs machine actionable. So we have this 10 principles paper describing what else apart from this recommendation is needed to really reduce the workload on researchers. And if you are interested in using the DMPs in your maDMPs in your institution, there is a paper published by ACM Transactions which describes how you can adapt your architecture of what you have at your university to make it work with maDMPs. There are also some other references about maDMPs that you can see later because I think we will share the slides. And last but not least, please join our working group to be always up to date with the recent developments. We don't spam too much the mailing list. We have currently more than 250 members, and you just have to sign up to RDA and join the group to be part of it. And we have also there a file repository. We can find presentations from the last plenaries. This can be also a source of information that can be relevant for your work on DMPs. Thank you very much for having the opportunity to present, and I'm looking forward to your questions in the Q&A.
Thanks, Tomas. Ellie, I think you're up next.
Okay, yes. Let me share my screen then. And can you see? I hope you can see. Perfect. So hi from me as well. I'm Ellie Vodopoulou. I work for Athena Research Center in Greece and the Open Infrastructure for Open Research in Europe. And I'm the product manager of Argos, which is the tool that I'm going to be talking about today, specifically for how we adopted the DMP common standard that was just explained by Tomas. Let me just say that I have another hat in the RDA. I'm also co-chairing together with Maria Pretzelis and Tomas, the Active Data Management Plans Interest Group, which I also welcome you to join. Very quickly about Argos, and this is the only slide that I have for this, just to give you a background of how this tool works. And then you can understand what we did in order to advance the machine actionability of its outputs. So Argos is a tool, a very dynamic tool that supports and implements the open access and fair data and software policies of funders and institutions. As you can see, it integrates with many services, it applies standards and best practices to facilitate the writing and publishing of data management plans as fair outputs. And at the end, what you see is that those outputs enter the research graph, the open research graph, which is a huge knowledge graph, let's say, with entities and the relationships between them, showing the research evolution and the research landscape at the moment. I mean, I've added here, if you want to check the service, there are these links where you can find it. But I want to stress this integration with the research graph, because this is what we focused on. So this is the first integration of a tool with the research graph. And you can see here the standard that was presented before mapped with the model of the research graph of OpenAir. So of course, the research graph gathers like information about research from more than 12,000. Like I cannot keep up with how many sources we harvest and we contextualize, but there are so many that of course the information that it has is more than what the DMP looks for, right? And here you can see the mapping of what is relevant to the DMP in the research graph according to the standard. And you can see the different relationships that can be directly mapped in blue, like here, the license, the dataset, the host, the funding, the DMP contact contributor. And you can see some additional elements like the relationships that are not portrayed in the standard, but are available in the research graph. So relationship between the DMP and the funding, for example. From this exercise, from this mapping, we saw that first there is an entity that the DMP, that the research graph should distinguish from other outputs, from publications, for example, datasets, and this is the DMP. So we added, if here you can see what was the research graph before, with information about the funder, the funding, the project, organization, the community, the researchers, the resources used and tools, publications, data, and software related to this project, then now we can distinguish the DMP from all those entities and also create links with the project and the data that are associated with it. So for that, we created new relationships, let's say new semantics, labeled as has DMP and has project, has dataset, and has DMP, in enhancing the research graph. In addition, what we did is enhancing Argos with some new standardized fields like contact, cost, language, and license as expected by the standard. But of course, there are more in Argos that are not covered in DMPs, and these are, for example, around quality or security of data. Having done that, we wanted to explore how we can retrieve this information, how we can retrieve DMPs as we would go to retrieve, search and retrieve other outputs like publications or reports. So during this, we saw that although there is a specific resource type that is proposed by different vocabularies to be used for data management plans, and it falls under publications, resource type data management plan. The adoption by repositories is minimum, and hence we had to disambiguate what we saw as DMPs from the different resource types that it is indexed under. So for example, you would be able to find DMPs under reports, publications, articles, or other labels. And during this disambiguation, and in order to provide to enhance the content coming in the DMPs from APIs, we had to disambiguate the organizations because, again, OpenAir is a big harvester and a big harvester that collects information for organizations, for example, not only from ROR, but also from Grid, from Crossref, so from many different sources that they have a specific form that they send this information to, and have unique identifiers for each organization. So if you go to Argos, you will be able to find multiple entries, let's say, for the same organization. So we wanted to resolve this as well. And we worked with Zenodo to do that, to apply the latest version of the vocabularies that suggest the resource type data management plan, and to make the data management plans more visible for self-archiving for researchers, and to push actually for publishing of DMPs that we do in our workflow automatically from Argos. The major findings and adaptations that we had to that I sum up here regarding the adoption is that we already had an import tool and export tool for DMPs, but we had to adapt and enhance it to support the exchange of maDMPs between platforms from Argos across different platforms. And the hackathon that was organized, I think, 2 years ago, was a very good opportunity for us to proceed with this exercise, because we work with different providers, DMP providers, to do that. In terms of the mappings, I added here some information. So when we couldn't find a direct mapping of the entities and the information in the research graph, that means that we have to take it from Argos, or sometimes we could tweak them to fit the standards requirements, or very rarely it is omitted. There is a granularity that we identified on how we had some entities inside the Argos model and how they are expected from the standard. And this granularity is relevant to where this entity or property is. Is it at the level of the dataset or the level of the DMP? And I provide here an example about the ethical issues. And in terms of the contextualization of information, we realized that more information are captured in maDMPs, more standardized information captured in maDMPs, of course, that can be further exploited than in plain text DMPs. That is also, unfortunately, until today, the common practice. Hopefully this will change through the RDA groups and the work that we do. This is where you can find me if you want more information. And yes, I'm happy to share more during the Q&A. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Ellie. Let me go ahead and started. So I think what I'm about to share is really complementary to Ellie and Argos approach. So I'm going to be talking about what we're doing at CDL to work to network to connect data management plans. So again, I'm with the California Digital Library. We're part of the UC system, so we work system-wide with all the campuses, but also internationally. So some of the areas that we work on, which I think are important here because they really also inform kind of our approach to machine-actionable DMPs. So obviously we do research data management services. We also work in data publishing and metrics with Dryad, and we work with persistent identifiers with ROAR. So those two services also really inform kind of our approach to machine actionable DMPs as a whole. So I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to talk a little bit kind of taking a step back and thinking about why machine actionable DMPs are important right now, thinking about it from a US perspective, but I think it also, has parallels internationally as well. I'll talk a little bit about how we're building and using machine actionable DMPs and what's next for us. So just diving into some of the big kind of at the federal level, some of the big policy changes that have been happening really kind of at a rapid rate, I will say, over the past few months. The first one that I want to mention came out of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, otherwise known as the OSTP. They had initially launched guidance back in 2013, so they were updating that guidance for federal agencies. This was really significant to those working in research data space and also in open access in general. So this basically at a high level, it removed the optional 12-month embargo from public access for federally funded research. So the idea is that researchers should be sharing their data without any delays for all federally funded research. They also expanded what this guidance applies to, and it's now for all federal agencies that have research or development expenditures. It used to just be kind of some of the bigger ones. The timeline in federal world is relatively short, so they recommend implementation no later than December 31, 2025. So for those in research data management, this is really significant and moves our sort of open data agenda forward in really significant, I think, ways. Another one that is governing a lot of what we're doing with data management plans and how we're thinking about using machine actionable DMPs is a new policy out of the National Institutes of Health. That goes into effect really soon, just in January 2023. That is saying that researchers should maximize the appropriate sharing of scientific data. So that's a big policy shift for those working in the biomedical space. So it's getting a lot of attention from data librarians, research administrators, and researchers themselves. So we are doing a lot of work to support the community as they work towards complying with these new policies. The final one I wanted to mention related to machine actionable DMPs did not get as much attention, but for those who are looking at machine actionable DMPs, it was really significant. And this was the NSF Chips and Science Act of 2022. It is an over 1,000-page document. Within that doc, buried in it, is a section on research, reproducibility, and replicability. And it establishes a requirement for the inclusion of a machine-readable data management plan in award proposals. So this is NSF specific. So clearly, I got excited. NSF hasn't really announced how they're going to implement that, what it's going to look like, what systems are they going to build? We don't know. There's a lot of questions regarding this new act. But just the fact that they made that statement in the act was really significant and sort of moves forward a lot of the work that we've been doing in the larger community for many years now. So with these kind of increasing mandates from federal funders, a lot of conversation in this space is now turning towards implementing policies and ensuring that organizations are in compliance with policies. So looking at how institutions can demonstrate and track compliance with new data sharing requirements. So we think that the next task kind of for us to do is toward building a robust infrastructure that builds on a lot of these things that we've been doing as a larger community in an open and transparent way to build systems and workflows that track research outputs from inception, from project inception with the plan, all the way through to long-term preservation. So just briefly for those who might not be familiar with the DMP tool, we are a platform for the creation of DMPs. We're a free open source community supported tool. I think one of the sort of unique features and one of my favorite features of working on this project is that we work out of the shared DMP roadmap code base that underlines a lot of different DMP tool services like DMP Online in the UK. We work closely with DMP Assistant in Canada, DMP Opidor in France. So collectively, we do a lot of our shared development and feature building is done in that larger community space. I always like to give a shout out to my editorial board. These are the folks that help me keep templates up to date, provide feedback on features, and I saw a few of them on the call. So thank you to them for helping that along. So now sort of switching gears to talk about our approach to machine actionable DMPs, and our focus on that has really, especially in recent months, has focused on tracking associated research outputs. So sort of similar, I think, to some of the work that Argos is doing around connecting to external APIs, be they funder APIs like NSF and NIH. Open Air API is a great one, using the DataSite event data service so that we can aggregate, collect, and really build off of all this information around research outputs, connect them to that DMP so that we have information about a project from the beginning, tracked all the way through the end, built on an existing open infrastructure. So just a few little things so that people can see specifically what this looks like. One way we get that information is through API connections. The other way we do it is manually. So either a DMP creator or an administrator at the institution can go to, this is a screenshot of what sort of the create plan page looks like in the DMP tool. We have a follow-up section where they can add sort of the funding outcome or the project outputs. So again, we ideally get all this information through the API automatically, but we also built a way for administrators and DMP tool owners can add that information manually. We always get asked about versioning, and I think when you're talking about machine-actionable DMPs, versioning is always a key piece of that. So this is something that we are building right now. It'll be released in January. So we're adding, this is actually the sort of landing page of DMP ID, which is a persistent identifier for a data management plan, has all of that sort of controlled metadata about the project, and then the versionings are listed up at the top right. So I wanted to talk kind of briefly about some of the high-level use cases that are driving our work right now. And really, I narrowed it down to two. I won't do all of them. The two biggest ones are, the first one, field station directors. This comes out of an NSF-funded grant we have called Fair Island. We're working with field stations around optimal open data policies and technical infrastructure. So data management plans and machine-actionable DMPs are part of that. And really what the field station administrators or field station directors have come out as saying that they need is the ability to demonstrate the impact of their field station so that they can use that to improve reporting for administrators and the board. So we're using machine-actionable DMPs as a way to track projects from inception to visiting a field station and then the associated outputs from that time at the station. Another one, clearly when I was talking about all these policy changes, we're talking to a lot of research administrators and they're talking about how they are needing to demonstrate compliance with the terms of an award, particularly as people are getting nervous about NIH changes and how they can ensure that their institution is in compliance with data sharing requirements. So they need the ability to, one, see all the DMPs for projects that that are being housed at their institution. And two, they need to see all of the relevant outputs that have been generated for that project and where they were eventually deposited. So that they know what outputs are planned, what are their responsibilities, and then where were they eventually deposited for. So just briefly, what the current state of machine-actionable DMPs in our environment. We have the persistent identifier for the data management plan, which is the DMP ID. So that's kind of the core piece. You can actually go in and link the plan to project outputs. That is done right now manually. We're building those API connections as well. We have the ability to, all files in the DMP tool can be structured or are structured, and they can be exported as JSON files. You can do that through the UI if people just want to see what it looks like, or through the API as well. One of the first things that we did as we were moving from sort of old school DMPs to the new machine-actionable DMPs, the first thing we did was to PIDify the DMP. So we tried to structure it and make it interoperable by converting, free text into identifiers wherever we could. So that is RORs, obviously, was the first one we did. We also did funder registry IDs. We had increasing ORCIDs, and then re3 data for research data repositories. And our next step on that list is RRIDs, which we plan to tackle probably late spring. So just to sum up, this is my final slide. When we talk about scaling machine-actionable DMPs, I would say that's kind of where we are right now. So what we're trying to do is to couple machine-actionable DMPs, building on that common standard that came out of RDA with PID-enabled infrastructure so that we can use that information to track projects over time. And that we can share all that information with the larger research data ecosystem in an open, transparent manner, because what we're doing is we're committing that to existing identifiers in terms of establishing relationships between outputs. So what we're doing specifically right now with DMP tool, I would say the two kind of features that I am the most excited about and I think will be most impactful in terms of scaling. We're working to pitify DMPs at scale by allowing the ability to upload externally created data management plans and to pitify them and generate identifiers for the plan itself. This is significant because we know most researchers don't need to use the DMP tool. Maybe they've been working for many, many years. They know how to make a plan. They don't need guidance, or at least they think they don't need guidance. And so we want a way to capture those at scale and to ingest them so that we can put them into the larger ecosystem and structure them and track a project over time. So we need that ability to upload PDFs, structure them, and pitify them. Related to that, we're working on a new output dashboard that will allow research administrators to track outputs connected with plans. So those are things that we're building right now. I think they would be in production, ideally late spring, early summer of next year. So that's all I've got, and I'm going to stop sharing, and I believe Merrick is up next.
Yes, thank you. So I'm Marek Suchanek from Czech Technical University in Prague, and I'm also one of the developers of the Data Stewardship Wizard, which is another DMP tool or data management planning tool. And it is initially developed in Elixir infrastructure, but now it is more widespread and is used even beyond Elixir and beyond Europe. The main difference when compared to other tools is that in Data Stewardship Wizard, we have a very complex or very based knowledge model, which is basically the questionnaire structure, and researchers go through this questionnaire, fill in the answers, and we are focused on not writing a text, but selection of predefined choices wherever it is possible. So we strive to be machine actionable by the first design of this tool. And today I will present basically how we adopted the DMP common standard. And as Thomas mentioned, it's like in and out. So I will talk about export and import of machine actionable DMPs. So first we worked on the export part, where we used something called document templates. As I said, the user fills the questionnaire, and then at some point, any point the user wants, can generate a document from that questionnaire. And the document template is basically a definition of transformation for the questionnaire replies into a document. The document can be HTML document, it can be PDF, Word document, but it can be also JSON, RDF, it doesn't matter, it can be any textual file, basically. We use Jinja templating language for that provides us this flexibility. And in the mentioned hackathon for machine actionable DMPs in 2021, we implemented this document template for the DMP common standard, both in JSON and RDF formats. The RDF formats are based on the ontology that is also placed in the repository. That someone already put the link in chat. And we supported both options. But what we had to do is adjust the questionnaire that we have, the knowledge model. The knowledge model is something that we developed together with our colleagues from Netherlands, based on their long expertise with reviewing DMPs and working with DMPs, working with scientists. And actually during this exercise, we added new questions, we restructured a bit the questions. For example, we added some administrative information like contributors or project information, including abstract, etc. And during that step, we also added some integrations. Because in DSW, we are able to easily configure, not directly in the code base, but in the knowledge models in something that you can edit directly as a content. You can configure integrations, and we edit, for example, research organization registry integration for affiliations, Crossref for funders, and what we had before is integration with fair sharing for reused data sets. So those were the adjustments, and still the coverage is not complete. There are some things that we may want to continue work on, but basically you can see it on the figure that the green boxes are covered completely, yellow boxes partly, and red boxes we don't have at all or very limited. But those boxes are actually optional, as Tomasz again mentioned. Not everything is mandatory, most things are optional, and these are optional. So outputs using this export are like compliant to this JSON schema, to the standard. So future plans in this sense are to improve this coverage. For example, improve dataset and distribution that we capture in the questionnaire. Of course, this exercise is not so simple because we need to really design it so users can understand the question, know what to fill in, and it makes also sense to them to fill that information. For costs, we have another tool which is called Storage Costs Evaluator, which is basically a tool where you select for how many years you need to save what type of data, with what availability, etc., and it will provide you some cost estimation. It's configured for costs in Europe and some year, but it can be updated. So it's not included in the DMP for this reason at this point. And we may want to also add some other missing information related to basically data sets and distributions. In some fields, we are like even a bit more machine actionable than the machine actionable standard. For example, for description of ethical issues, we have more questions where the user can say yes, no, and maybe there are more options than these two. And we actually need to synthesize the description, the sentences from these questions, yes and no. So there are things like that as well. Here it is how it actually looks like in the tool. So as I said, when the user is finished or needs to create a document from the questionnaire, the user can select here a document template. It can be, of course, Horizon Europe or Science Europe template, but one of those is also Machine-actionable DMP template. And for that, the user can select from the formats that are there, JSON or the various RDF formats. Other way how to work with that is to use directly preview inside the web tool. So instead of downloading the file, the user can preview, for example, the JSON file directly in the UI, as is on the right side of the slide. Then for the import part, and it's something new because this feature we implemented this year. It's called Project Importer, and it allows flexibly import replies to questionnaire in DSW. And the first importer that we had was for machine-actionable DMPs. So basically, a user can put machine-actionable DMP in JSON to this importer and fill the answers in questionnaire in DSW. Again, the coverage of the standard is more or less the same as for export. So basically what you export from DSW, you can again import in this way. Of course, the problem is with the textual fields where we synthesize the text from various answers. Again, here it's a screenshot how it looks like. User, you can see the questionnaire with contributors. A user on the left top corner selects import from RDA JSON, and a window opens where basically a file is selected and then it loads the replies. That's not, of course, all. We can work on improving importers and export on the document template, but there are more things because this machine actionability open doors to more possibilities, as also Tomáš mentioned in his presentation with the glue, basically. So we can exchange the DMPs with other tools directly via APIs. We can develop and integrate some machine actionable DMP evaluators or assessments. What we worked recently are arrow crates. So we want to work on inclusion of these RDF, like RDF format inside arrow crates, and also enhance linking of persistent identifiers. As I said, we have file sharing, we have research organization registry, Crossref, but we want to, of course, take a look what's in there as other possibilities. So to conclude this, we improved interoperability with other tools, and everything that I presented now is open source as DSW itself. So anyone can take a look and potentially improve or take it to their instance and reuse it easily. And that's it from my side. And I'm also looking forward to the Q&A session.
Thank you very much, Marek. So let's jump quickly to the Q&A now. We have like 5 minutes left for the questions. Some were already answered. So we had six questions you can see in the answer tab, and we have new questions coming up. There is one question for you, Marek. Have any groups set up the wizard for US funders, from Brian Vestra?
To my knowledge, I don't know about any at this point, but sometimes we simply don't know about them because they don't let us know, and they let us know just when they reach into some issues and need help. So to my knowledge at this point, I don't know about them.
Okay, thank you. And question for Maria, when will the new feature that are in DMP tool be available on GitHub, from Elizabeth Christina?
Yeah, I was trying to type that one in. So some of the features that I discussed are already in our DMP tool GitHub. Some of them will be deployed and available on GitHub in the early next year in January. And then these sort of uploading DMPs as PDF files in the new dashboard, those won't be available, I think, until like early summer of next year. Also, our repositories are split. Some of it is tracked in DMP tool GitHub, some of them is roadmap GitHub, and then we have what's called the hub, which manages a lot of our machine actionable features. So if you have something specific you're looking for, you can reach me and I will tell you which repository you would find it in.
Thank you very much. There is a question from Wendy Shen. So generally speaking, does the maDMP has a preference of JSON format, or will maDMP have any preference for format in the future? I think that's a question for me, actually. So within the working group, we wanted to keep the recommendation independent of the format, and that's why the documentation on GitHub is in a form of a table. But we had to provide some examples that developers can work with, and JSON is the most common format right now, and that's why we have these examples. There is also a JSON schema. Today with us, we have João Cardoso, one of the participants. He recently has published a paper describing an ontology version of the recommendation. So the recommendation itself is independent of a specific format. Okay. There was a question about maybe from the last one. What is the impact of the machine actionability of a DMP, from Shalin? Does any of the speakers wants to answer this one? Okay, I think I can try. There is no quick answer on this. So basically, the whole goal why we'll be doing this is because we want to reduce the workload on the researchers, as I explained at the beginning. And I think that's the impact. And we want to reuse the information. We want to ask people things once only, and basically have a better quality of information in a DMP. We don't want it to be a dead document. We want it to be a living document. And I think that's the impact of machine-actionable DMP. Okay, there are some questions left, but I think we don't have much time. So I would wrap up and stop here, and I will hand over to Maria for the last words in this webinar. Thank you.
All right, there we go. Just a few slides while we wrap up. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We also wanted to thank a few people who are working behind the scenes. So thanks to Megan and Rebecca for providing technical support, Digital Alliance in Canada for arranging the French interpreter services, our French interpreter Yanitza Corando, Federico Santuga, I'm not gonna Santucalo, Andrea Moro Campos from La Referencia for arranging the Spanish interpreter services, and our Spanish interpreter, Roxana Gutierrez. So as we mentioned earlier, this webinar recording and all of the slide decks will be available on the RDA website webinar page. So the RDA US recently launched the RDA podcast series, Data Streams, in 2022. It features interviews with members of newly endorsed RDA groups to hear what they have planned over the next 18 months. So RDA's already launched 5, and they're going to continue the service into 2023. So you can see the lineup at the website below. Maybe someone can chat that in, and you can subscribe to be notified of the new recordings. Sorry, I think I slipped there we go. So the RDA is celebrating its 10-year anniversary next year at the 2023 RDA Plenary 20 meeting in Gothenburg, Sweden. It will be on March 21 to 23. It's co-hosted by the Chalmers University and the University of Gothenburg. So this will be an in-person meeting with limited seating. So watch for registration and be sure to register early. So we have lots of exciting events happening, and we'll hope that you'll join us again in the future. So that's all we have for today, and thank everyone so much for attending.